at ready4IDT.com.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson. America First with Sebastian Gorka, weekday afternoons at 3 on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Jimmy Lai is the publisher of the Apple Daily newspaper in Hong Kong. He was sentenced, we've talked about him many times before, but I don't know that his name came up when communist dictator Xi came over to San Francisco. The streets lined with Chi-Com flags.
Oh my God. Homeless people removed for the first time in decades. Nothing to see here. Everything
right, proper welcome for a dictator. Certainly, the corporate America the corporate America representatives in attendance were all waving those flags during Xi's remarks. Pathetic display. But anyway, Jimmy Lai was sentenced to more than 6 years in prison in December of 2022, but he still awaits trial on other charges, trumped-up charges by the Chinese communists. He's being sentenced and he's being gulagged the way that Solzhenitsyn was against the Soviets because he spoke up against the totalitarian regime. The question is, what should we in the West be doing about it other than writing op-eds? What should we expect our government to be doing about it? Perhaps offering the same focus and negotiation that we applied here in the West, in America, to the release of Brittany Griner from Putin's clutches. For more on that topic, we're pleased to be joined by Benedict Rogers. He's the co-founder and chief executive of Hong Kong Watch and author of The China Nexus. Ben Rogers, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Good to be with you.
So you're friends with Jimmy Lai, right?
That's right. Yes, I've known him for quite some years, and used to meet him fairly regularly before he was imprisoned.
Do you have any sense of what his condition is? I mean, he's not a young man.
That's right. He just turned 76 just before Christmas. My understanding is, there are obviously health concerns for a man at that age, but that said, I think he's in as good health as he could be in the circumstances, and certainly mentally and spiritually, he's in remarkable health. He's a very devout Christian, a Catholic, and my understanding is he's using a lot of his time in his prison cell to read and study spiritual and religious books and pray. So that is sustaining him. But
does he have any connect to the outside world? Is he allowed visitors or information to come from him and get to him?
Yes, he is allowed periodic family visits. I don't currently know how frequent they were. I think the frequency was reduced a few months ago. But he does get family visits from time to time, and I think occasional other visits from friends. And my understanding is he is allowed to receive books as long as they're not of or not deemed to be of a political nature.
Mm-hmm. And he's a British national, right?
That's correct. And it's taken a long time for the British government to do anything about his case. There has been progress in the last few months, and Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, wrote a letter just earlier this week speaking up very strongly for him. But in my view, the British government should have been doing that a long time ago.
Why have they been slow-walking it?
I think essentially it comes down to this sort of nervousness that many Western governments have about not wanting to offend the communist regime in China because of business interests, and that's the only explanation I can come up with. And I think the British government has only moved on this case because of pressure from parliamentarians, pressure from the media, pressure from groups like us in Hong Kong Watch. Otherwise, I'm not sure they would have done.
So interesting. I mean, I sort of have this same dynamic with Evan Gershkovich Gershkovich, Wall Street Journal reporter who's been imprisoned by Putin, where the Wall Street Journal, appropriately, since he's an employee, has been keeping track of this and writing periodic editorials and I assume putting pressure on behind closed doors best they can. But it just hasn't gotten sort of the attention you would expect, certainly not the attention that Brittany Griner got. And it's the same thing with Jimmy Lai. I mean, this is a member of the press. This is a pro-democracy, anti-totalitarian member of the press. He had a news outlet. And this just hasn't seemed to captivate Western media. And I wonder why you think that is, if you think that is.
Well, I think that is true, although I would say that his trial has probably had far more attention than many of the other trials in Hong Kong because he is such an internationally respected figure. But you're right, although it has had some attention, some coverage, there have been op-eds about Jimmy Lai indeed also the Wall Street Journal and other newspapers, it hasn't had the level of attention that it deserves. And I don't know if that's just because we're in a time at the moment where there are so many global issues and crises, not least obviously Ukraine and now Israel and Gaza, that are occupying people's minds. That could be one explanation. But I agree, it is receiving some attention, but not what it deserves.
But he's a self-made billionaire. I mean, a lot of people don't know his rag to riches story. Can you tell us?
Absolutely. It's a remarkable story. He was born in mainland China. At the age of just 12 years old, he left on his own as a stowaway on a boat from mainland China to Hong Kong, fleeing the terrible famine of Mao's Great Leap Forward era in China. Arrived in Hong Kong, worked as effectively a child laborer in a textiles factory, and worked his way up, became a factory manager, and then started his own business, and that was a remarkable success. He started other businesses. He owned an amazing chain of retail stores, Giordano, which was huge across Asia. And then he branched into the publishing and media industry essentially after the Tiananmen Square massacre, where he saw what happened, wanted to be in solidarity with the democracy movement in China, and started the Apple Daily newspaper. But it is an incredible rags to riches story.
Yeah, the press on this is so interesting. I haven't seen a ton of press coverage. I mean, again, not commensurate with the atrocities of what Chinese communists have done to Uyghur Muslims in that country either. And it's just curious. I mean, you see this just in comparison to the coverage that pro-Hamas protesters get, and those politicians calling for ceasefires and activists and so on and so forth. And I just wonder what the Western media's attitude really is towards Chinese communist, this Chinese communist dictatorship and communists generally, not named Putin. I just wonder if it speaks to something of a mindset about the West versus the Far East.
I think there's a lot of truth in that, and as you say, I mean, every day these days we're hearing pro-Hamas voices, whereas from time to time the genocide of the Uyghurs gets some coverage, but then it falls away again, and the same with Hong Kong and the other issues under the Chinese regime. I think there are exceptions to this. There are newspapers like, again, we keep mentioning the Wall Street Journal, but they have been consistent in publishing at least opinion pieces on these issues. The Telegraph in the UK has been pretty good. But overall, it is strange. And I think for some, it varies depending on the outfit. But for some publications, there may be economic considerations. Maybe they have or have ambitions to have some kind of business in China, and they don't want to rock the boat. For others, it may be a more ideological consideration. It's hard to generalize, I think, but I certainly agree with the premise of your comment that it's not receiving the attention it deserves.
It seems to me too that we should be doing a better job here, and maybe vis-a-vis the British government having pressure put on it to enlist the American government to also put pressure on China with respect to Jimmy Lai. I mean, we had, as I mentioned, we had Xi come to town, come to San Francisco, and I don't remember Jimmy Lai's name being brought up, and any coverage of that possibility, or even that should have been on the agenda when Biden spoke with Xi, and it just really speaks to me of a establishment press corps inside the Beltway in this country that spends a lot of time talking about the importance of a free press, but only if it relates directly to them. If it relates to an outlet that's more conservative, there's not the same concern. If it relates to a dissident of a regime that incredibly I think they're sympathetic to, then there's not that same concern. And I don't know. This may be an opportunity to explore that a little bit more and call some of the decision makers at these outlets in the West to account.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And, for anyone who is genuinely concerned about press freedom, not just press freedom for their own particular outlet, but press freedom in principle, you couldn't find a clearer, stronger example of an absolute travesty of press freedom in both the imprisonment of Jimmy Lai, but also the forced closure of his newspaper, the Apple Daily, in 2021, which was the largest, best-selling, mass circulation pro-democracy newspaper in Hong Kong. It was very successful. It had no financial difficulties, and the only reason it shut down was because the authorities basically froze the bank account, meaning the newspaper couldn't pay their bills, and so they had no option but to close. If that's not a violation of press freedom, I don't know what is. And so anyone who champions press freedom in principle ought to be highlighting Jimmy and the Apple Daily.
Yeah, well, these on-again, off-again champions of press freedom, I mean, we see this in other places, too, in Ukraine, when Zelensky cracks down on news reporters and news outlets, as he has done. There's nary any reporting of that, too, because this has been selected as something which the D.C. press corps here is going to be unrelenting cheerleaders for. And once they've decided that this is a mascot for them, then they're not interested in any cognitive dissonance or certainly any contextual reporting. So we just see this over and over again, and it seems to me it speaks to another institution that's supposed to be a bedrock of a free society, the Fourth Estate, that really isn't interested in holding the other three states accountable. It's more interested in being part of the other three estates.
Yes, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I will just add one slightly more positive note, though, which is that a few months ago there was, despite all the concerns you've raised, there was actually a letter that was signed, I forget by how many, but by a large number of newspaper editors from around the world, from the US, the UK, other countries as well, about Jimmy Lai, and that was quite significant. So, although much more needs to be done, there are still some good people in the media industry who are doing the right thing. But we need to keep at it.
And is your expectation that barring some outside pressure, that the Chinese communists will keep Jimmy Lai gulagged until his death?
That is my expectation. I think the verdict is already predetermined, and the only thing that we don't know at this stage is what the length of his sentence will be. But the minimum sentence under the national security law, which is the trial that he's currently underway, is a minimum sentence of 10 years, and I don't expect them to be lenient. So we can expect a sentence of more than 10 years, and given that he's 76, it's very highly likely that he will die in prison.
Benedict Rogers, co-founder and chief executive of Hong Kong Watch, author of The China Nexus. Ben Rogers, thanks for joining us and elevating the case of Jimmy Lai. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
At Signature Bank, going the distance for business banking customers is what we do every day. We understand that business owners have a strategic mission, a drive to succeed, a plan for growth, and don't have time to wait for a bank to respond. With Signature Bank, you not only have a banking partner that has roots right here in Chicago, but our decisions are made locally too. Signature Bank